Little Red Cap by Carol Ann Duffy. At childhood's end, the houses petered out into playing fields, the factory allotments kept like mistresses by kneeling married men, the silent railway line, the hermit's caravan, till you came at last to the edge of the woods. It was there that I first clapped eyes on the wolf. He stood in a clearing, reading his verse out loud, in his wolfy drawl, a paperback in his hairy paw, red wine staining his bearded jaw. What big ears he had, what big eyes he had, what teeth! In the interval, I made quite sure he'd spotted me. Sweet 16, never been babe waif, and bought me a drink. My first. You might ask why. Here's why. Poetry. The wolf I knew would lead me deep into the woods, away from home to a dark, tangled, thorny place, lit by the eyes of owls. I crawled in his wake, my stockings ripped to shreds, scraps of red from my blazer snagged on twig and branch, murder clues. I lost both shoes, but got there. Wolf's lair, better beware. Lesson 1 that night. Breath of the wolf in my ear was the love poem. I clung till dawn to his thrashing fur, for what little girl doesn't dearly love a wolf? Then I slid from between his heavy matted paws, and went in search of a living bird, white dove, which flew straight from my hands to his open mouth. One bite, dead. How nice! Breakfast in bed, he said, licking his chops. As soon as he slept, I crept to the back of the lair, where a whole wall was crimson gold aglow with books. Words were truly alive on the tongue, in the head, warm, beating, frantic, winged music and blood. But then I was young, and it took 10 years in the woods to tell that a mushroom stoppers the mouth of a buried corpse, that birds are the utter thought of trees, that a greying wolf howls the same old song at the moon, year in, year out, season after season, same rhyme, same reason. I took an axe to a willow to see how it wept. I took an axe to a salmon to see how it leapt. I took an axe to the wolf as he slept. One chop, scrotum to throat, and saw the glistening virgin white of my grandmother's bones. I filled his old belly with stones. I stitched him up. Out of the forest I come with my flowers, singing all. The collection of poems by Carol Ann Duffy, entitled The Wolf's Wife, was first published in 1999 and presents stories, myths, fairy tales, and characters in Western culture from the point of view of women. You see, much of literature throughout the ages have always been patriarchal. So what these poems try to do is that they put women at the center, and they sort of weave in a new story from their perspective. And even this poem, Little Red Cap, which is also the first poem in the collection, is a recasting of the Grimm brothers' fairy tale, Little Red Riding Hood. The poem can be read in 3 different layers. The first, the literal one, in which Little Red Cap is Little Red Cap and the wolf is the wolf. The second is the biographical one, wherein Little Red Cap stands for Carol Ann Duffy herself, while the wolf stands for Adrian Henry. The third is Little Red Cap stands for every woman, whereas the wolf stands for every man and patriarchy. Before beginning with our poem, let's just have a quick look at the Grimm brothers' fairy tale, Little Red Riding Hood. As you all are aware, in the beginning, Little Red Riding Hood is asked by her mother to take the picnic basket to her sick grandmother. And then she is very precisely asked not to get off the track. So she leaves, and in the woods she sees a wolf, and the wolf asks her where she is going. The wolf, during the conversation, tries to get to know of the granny, and also forms a plan of eating or devouring Little Red Riding Hood. So he sort of asks Little Red Riding Hood to stray off the path, take the road through the woods, and also why not take a few flowers for her sick grandmother. Little Red Riding Hood somehow thinks that's a good idea. While she's picking out the flowers, the wolf reaches the grandmother's house, devours the grandmother, and then dresses up as the grandmother and waits for Little Red Riding Hood. When Little Red Riding Hood comes, she knocks on the door and she enters, and we have the very well-known conversation wherein she looks at grandmother and she utters those lines. "Oh grandmother," she said, "what big ears you have." "The better to hear you with, my child," was the reply. "But grandmother, what big eyes you have," she said. "The better to see you with, my dear." "But grandmother, what large hands you have, the better to hug you with." "Oh, but grandmother, what a terrible big mouth you have, the better to eat you with." That's when the wolf jumps upon Little Red Riding Hood and eats her too. After eating Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf falls asleep. Luckily, a huntsman was passing by, and he sees the wolf snoring, and he realizes the wolf might have eaten the grandmother. So, instead of killing, he cuts up the wolf's belly, and from the belly, Little Red Riding Hood comes out. And then he cuts further, and also the grandmother is saved. So, they put pebbles and stones inside the belly of the wolf and they stitch it up so that the wolf is not able to run and catch them.
Okay, starting with the analysis, we look at the first change which obviously takes place is the title. If we look at the original, it has the word hood. The word hood actually, if you know, covers the entire head, which also has to deal with shyness and modesty. Whereas in this one, the word is cap, which is also unisex and also is a bit more stylish. So we see the aspect of change right from the start when it comes to the title. Now, if we look at the whole aspect of the poem, we also start to see the difference in the storyline. If you look at the original tale, wherein the huntsman actually comes and saves the grandmother and Little Red Riding Hood, here she actually brings the help, or she actually helps herself. There is no external male help who obviously comes and saves them. Apart from that, you also realize that the original Little Red Riding Hood, she is obviously duped by the wolf and she is pretty naive and quite an innocent girl. Whereas in this one, Little Red Cap, she herself goes to the wolf, she knows what she is doing, and every decision that she takes is her own decision. So we also have to realize the whole aspect of the personal decision, the female's her individual decision. So this entire poem, as we can see, is a transformation of a girl to a young adulthood and also her sexual awakening. If we do a line by line analysis, the first one, at childhood's end, the houses petered out into playing fields, the factory allotments. We realize the first three words, at childhood's end, set the theme immediately. This is going to be a poem which is about the loss of innocence. A childhood is going to end and a new version of this girl is about to begin. The factory allotments kept like mistresses by kneeling married men, the silent railway line, the hermit's caravan, till at last you came to the edge of the woods. It was there that I first clapped eyes on the wolf. Now, if you look at the whole aspect of the setting, the scenario is also quite autobiographical. The aspect of the town right near the woods is also autobiographical, that Carol Ann Duffy herself grew up in a small town of Stafford, which was a small market town which was around in England, which was right beside the woods. From the aspect of the town to the wolf is actually very autobiographical. She, in her interview, she did mention that she had, when she was 16, she had gone to see this concert in Liverpool where she met the poet, musician and artist Adrian Henry. And in this case, the wolf, he stood in a clearing, reading his verse out loud in his wolfy drawl, a paper bag in his hairy paw, red wine staining his bearded jaw. What big ears he had, what big eyes he had, what teeth. In the interval, I made quite sure he spotted me, sweet 16, never been, babe, waif, and bought me a drink. Now, this entire thing is very autobiographical, and as Carol Ann Duffy herself had mentioned, she did try her best that Adrian Henry would notice her in the interval, and he did, and that's when offered her a wine, and she did. Now, when we talk about the aspect of wine, there can be a variety of implications, like from the literal to a metaphorical. Apart from that, when we talk about this word, the word babe, waif, you realize the word babe obviously means a young woman who is sexually attractive, and waif is an extremely thin girl who is quite young but not really entirely attractive. So when Carolyn Duffy says neither entirely attractive or entirely not so attractive, she was, if we can say, average. Apart from that, do focus on the lines, what big ears he had, what big eyes he had, what teeth, which somehow directly relate to the original tale of the Little Red Riding Hood, wherein she meets the wolf and she mentions all those lines, oh grandmother, what big eyes you have, what big teeth. The autobiographical element becomes deeply apparent when Carolyn Duffy, when she herself had said that she did try that Adrian Henry would notice her, and he does, and Carolyn Duffy and Adrian Henry become quite close friends and then lovers, and they end up living together for 12 years. But mind you, when I say living together, they weren't actually married. They lived together for 12 whole years. And also, when you talk about this aspect, what brings her to the wolf and what draws her closer to the wolf, as she mentions, you might ask why. Here's why. Poetry. The wolf I knew would lead me deeper into the woods, away from home, to a dark, tangled, thorny place. Now, when we talk about this aspect of being ensnared, she wants herself to be ensnared. She wants to be taken in. She isn't that naive little girl from Little Red Riding Hood who obviously is fooled by the wolf. Here, she herself takes the decisions and she wants Adrian Henry to take her to his place. And apart from that, when we look at even these aspects of the home and the woods, we also realize the home stands for the secure place in which one is at comfort, wherein the wood is quite dark, tangled, thorny, and which obviously has a much more darker picture in contrast to the house or the home. The sexual, when we look at those words, I crawled in his wake, my stockings ripped to shreds, scratched stuffs red from my blazer, snagged on twigs and branch, murder clues, I lost both shoes, but got there, wolf's lair, better beware. Now, we have, as some of the sexual imageries are a bit indirect. When we look at all those aspects of the stockings being ripped apart, we have blood, we have blazer being ripped. We also have this word called murder clues, which you might also end up associating. What is obviously what is dying? We can obviously see the virginity, which is obviously being murdered. I lost both shoes. You'll also realize there's an internal rhyme taking place within those lines when she says murder clues, I lost both shoes, but got there, wolf's lair, better beware. And some of these aspects of the sexual imageries are not so indirect, they're very direct. As we can see, lesson 1, that night, breath of the wolf in my ear was a love poem. That night, breath of the wolf in my ear was a love poem. I clung till dawn to his thrashing fur. For what little girl doesn't dearly love a wolf? Those are very direct sexual imagery. Apart from that, when we look at that word, what little girl doesn't dearly love a wolf, it also is sort of paying homage to Sylvia Plath's poem Daddy, which obviously had those lines, every woman admires a fascist. Now if we move further, when she says, slid from between his heavy matted paws and went in search of a living bird, white dove, which flew straight from my hand to his open mouth, one bite, dead. Now the Little Red Cap, after her night with the wolf, she goes out and she offers, because of this love that they have made, she then offers what she had created to the wolf, and what she creates is a white dove, and she then offers it to the wolf. The only thing is, which she hasn't treated, the bird directly flies straight into his mouth and he eats it up. So Carolyn Duffy realizes that her voice, and which is in the form of this white dove, cannot be appreciated or would not be appreciated as long as she stays with the wolf. This is her sudden realization that she comes up, and she realizes that her voice would never really equate or never really be treated as equal when she's still with the wolf. So that's when she realizes she has to take different steps. As soon as he slept, I crept to the back of the lair where a whole wall was crimson gold aglow with books. Words were truly alive in the tongue, in the head, warm, beating, frantic, winged music and blood. And that's when Carolyn Duffy, or Little Red Cap, she goes out, and when the wolf is sleeping, she goes to the back of the lair and realizes and finds an entire library. What is this library? This is the library, the men who have written before. And these writings, if you realize, they have a different color as compared to the color which she has been writing. Whereas her writing is white, peaceful, like a dove. The writings of the men bear the color crimson gold, and they were pretty much aglow, and which also shows the contrast between the writings of the woman and the men all throughout the ages, all throughout history. But then I was young, and it took 10 years into the woods to tell that a mushroom stoppers the mouth of a buried corpse. So when we talk about this line, it took her 10 years. Now when we talk about 10 years, we have to also realize the difference between Little Red Cap and Carolyn Duffy. Little Red Cap stays with the wolf for 10 years until she moved out. Carolyn Duffy stays with Adrian Henry for 12 years. But I do mind you that Carolyn Duffy and Adrian Henry separated. And Carolyn Duffy had also said that she was also there when at the funeral of Adrian Henry. It took 10 years in the woods to tell that a mushroom stoppers the mouth of a buried corpse. Now this line, if you look closely, can also be interpreted as if you have a corpse in the middle of the forest, which might even had the ability to speak if it could, but if it stays there for a long time, mushrooms start to grow from its mouth, and it also loses whatever ability it would have or might have had to even speak, and that is also lost. And that's why Carolyn Duffy, or Little Red Cap, has to take the step. She has to move out. And the birds are the utter thoughts of trees. Try comparing how birds are used twice. When she obviously makes her word, makes her art, that's also a white dove, and also she compares it with birds are the utter thoughts of trees. Now trees which are obviously stagnant, they cannot really move, so how do they express their ideas? The birds are their expressed thoughts who carry their ideas throughout to other places, to other trees, to other areas. She also realizes by these lines that a greying wolf howls the same old song at the moon, year in, year out, season after season, same rhyme, same reason. And this is also a reference to all the male writing, all the patriarchal writing throughout history. If you realize, every single writing has always projected women the same way. They have been projected by every other man the same way. And that's when she realizes that is what she understands, that the greying wolf howls the same song year in, year out, and that needs to be changed. So what she does is, I took an axe to a willow to see how it wept. I took an axe to a salmon to see how it leapt. I took an axe to the wolf as he slept, and chopped scrotum to throat, and saw the glistening virgin white of my grandmother's bones. Now, this aspect is also quite reminiscent of the original tale, wherein the huntsman sews up or cuts up the body of the wolf. Herein, she is almost like performing a sort of a dissection, and what she does is she takes an axe, but just like a dissection, she also needs to practice it, just like a doctor would obviously, or a surgeon would obviously have to practice it, and she does practice it. She takes it to a tree and she cuts it, then she takes it to another living creature, to a salmon, to see how it leapt. And I took an axe to the wolf as he slept, one chop scrotum to throat. Now, if you look at the word scrotum to throat, it can also be interpreted as the two things which enticed Little Red Cap. The two things which obviously made her go after the wolf. The scrotum can be a reference or a metaphorical reference which obviously drew her to the wolf, and also the throat can be for the poetry. So the sexual activity and also the poetry, the two things which obviously drew Little Red Cap closer to the wolf, and which she wanted to be part of the wolf. Now, the last few lines then again go back to the original tale of the Little Red Riding Hood. Now when she cuts up the wolf, she finds the glistening virgin white of my grandmother's bones. Now, we actually have an oxymoron here, because when you say the grandmother and virgin, that obviously cannot be true. So what is this virgin white of my grandmother's bones? Now, by virgin we might then understand as the voicelessness or the identity. The grandmother is virgin as in that the grandmother stands for every other female who have been devoured by this patriarchy, the men, and who never really got a voice of their own. And Carol really got a voice of their own, and Carolyn Duffy or Little Red Cap is about to change that. And in this way she's obviously going to bring a new era. I filled his old belly with stones, I stitched him up, which obviously is again a reference to the original tale, so that the wolf cannot really chase him. Out of the forest I come, with my flowers singing all alone. And then she obviously comes out of the woods all alone. There is no huntsman to help her, there is no male help, she brings the help to herself. The change which obviously takes place between the Little Red Cap and Little Red Riding Hood is we realize that the decision of being with the wolf, going to the wolf, being ensnared, is her own decision, as well as coming out, realizing her value, her identity is also her own decision, and she saves herself rather than needing the help of another man. Apart from that, if you look at the last few lines, it all states that to be a good writer, a poet or an artist, you also have to read or understand what previous generations have written. You cannot really critique something if you never really know what the earlier ones have written. And in this case, Carolyn Duffy or Little Red Cap, the association with the wolf was as important and required, because being with the wolf made her realize what the earlier generations have been writing. It also perfected her craft. What she wrote before and what she wrote after was drastically different, and this is an important element. So Carolyn Duffy does say that you have to understand, to write properly, you have to understand previous history. To even critique something, you also have to know what previous writings have been, and then only can you perfect your art and your craft, and only can you perfect your art and your craft and be better writers or